Dark clouds gathered across the stars long before the first battle began. Rumors whispered through the colonies of a black ship, a war machine older than empires, drifting like a shadow at the edge of every horizon. Where it appeared, worlds burned. Where it lingered, hope faded. Civilizations bent their knees to tyrants who ruled with fire and fear until humanity stood alone, a stubborn ember refusing to die. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by enemies who believed the war had already been decided. But they were wrong. Humanity had seen dark horizons before, and every time they had fought back harder than anyone thought possible. The black ship was more than a vessel. It was a symbol of the tyrant's rule, massive, silent, unyielding. It blotted out suns and smothered voices of rebellion before they had a chance to rise. When entire fleets vanished into its shadow, the galaxy trembled, believing no force could withstand it. Yet somewhere beneath that shadow, in hidden bunkers and broken cities, human voices carried plans. They were not generals of great fleets, not rulers of vast empires, but survivors, soldiers, and ordinary people who refused to kneel. To them, the black ship was not a horizon of despair. It was a target. The war had dragged across centuries, with one species after another crushed beneath the tyrant's reign. Humanity had once been overlooked, dismissed as a backwater race barely worth enslaving. That mistake became the tyrant's greatest weakness. In the quiet of their disregard, humans grew cunning. They learned to fight in silence, to vanish into the shadows, to build weapons out of scrap and desperation. They became ghosts on occupied worlds, phantoms in the ruins of cities the tyrants thought abandoned. Every strike was small, but every strike left a scar, and scars add up. But humanity's final war did not begin with grand speeches or parades of soldiers. It began with whispers in the dark, with coded signals carried through forbidden space. It began when human scouts found the black ship orbiting, a ruined world harvesting its remains, stripping it bare of life. They studied it not with fear, but with fascination, seeking weaknesses where others only saw death. For the first time, the hunters were being hunted, though they did not yet know it. And humanity was patient. They would wait as long as it took to strike, because for them this war was not about power or conquest, but survival. Among the ruins of shattered colonies, human resistance grew. Ragged uniforms, patched weapons, starships cobbled together from salvaged hulls, they looked fragile, even broken. Yet every crew carried a fire no machine could extinguish. Some of them had lost families to the tyrants. Others had lived under chains until they chose death over obedience. All of them had seen the black horizon and refused to let it consume them. When they boarded their ships, they did so knowing they might never return. But they also knew that if humanity did not rise now, there would be nothing left to save. What made humans different was not their weapons, nor their technology, but their ability to see beyond fear. Where the tyrants ruled through terror, humans thrived on defiance. They turned weakness into strength, chaos into order, desperation into resolve. They fought not as a single empire, but as countless scattered voices uniting in one final shout, enough. Across the stars, hidden beacons flickered alive, carrying a single message. The war ends now, one way or another. And in the shadow of the black ship, humanity prepared for its greatest gamble. No one knew the cost of such a war. Worlds would fall. Entire fleets would be lost. But there was no turning back. Humanity had chosen a path that could only end in victory or extinction. They carried the memory of every colony burned, every child stolen, every cry that went unanswered. The tyrants had ruled for so long, they believed themselves untouchable, unbreakable, eternal. But eternity was fragile when met with human rage. And on the edge of the dark horizon, the tyrants would learn what it meant to face a species that refused to die. The first strike would not come with the fury of 1,000 cannons, but with silence. Small ships, barely more than skeletons of steel, slipped through the void. Their engines whispered instead of roared, their weapons hidden beneath false panels. They moved like shadows toward the black ship, unseen, unremarked. Inside, crews waited in tense silence, hearts pounding against ribs, hands gripping weapons that might be useless against the behemoth ahead. But still they moved forward, because there was no other choice. Behind them, humanity watched and held its breath. The black ship loomed larger with every passing moment, a horizon of steel and darkness that seemed endless. Its surface was scarred yet unbroken, its defenses silent yet awake. For every mile, the humans drew closer, the weight of history pressed heavier on their shoulders. Countless civilizations had reached this horizon and never returned. Countless voices had been silenced beneath its shadow. Now humanity came to add its voice, not in surrender, but in defiance. Whether they lived or died, they would be remembered. They would make the tyrants bleed. Deep inside the ship, commanders watched their scanners, eyes narrowing at faint signals brushing the edge of detection. Perhaps they dismissed them as debris, as so many others had been. Perhaps they smiled in arrogance, believing no one would dare strike against them. But in that moment, a shift rippled through the galaxy. For the first time, the hunters were not prepared. And for the first time, the black ship faced a threat it could not predict, the unrelenting will of humanity. The crews whispered final words to one another, not of fear, but of fire. They spoke of the lives they carried within them, the voices of ancestors who had fought every war and lost none. They spoke of the stars that belonged to no empire, of the freedom that was worth more than survival. And as the black ship's shadow swallowed their tiny vessels whole, humanity's final war truly began. But no one knew what waited inside the darkness. No one knew if the weapons they carried would pierce its armor, or if their voices would be silenced like all the rest. The only certainty was this: the horizon was no longer empty. It had met the one force it could not break, the determination of humankind. And in the silence before the first shot, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if the black ship would finally fall, or if humanity's last defiance would vanish into the void forever. The silence after the first approach was heavier than any sound of battle. The black ship loomed above the human vessels like a shadow that could stretch forever. Its hull reflected no light, its form almost blending into the void itself. To the crews inside the small ships, it felt less like approaching an enemy and more like sailing into a nightmare that had swallowed countless others. Yet their hands did not shake. Humanity had always walked into the unknown with nothing but stubbornness to guide them. And now, that stubbornness was their only shield against the tyrants who had ruled the stars too long. Inside one of the lead strike ships, the crew sat in tense quiet. Their uniforms were patched with scars of older battles, their faces lined with exhaustion. Each of them carried stories too heavy for words: homes destroyed, loved ones gone, cities burned. They weren't professional soldiers of a mighty empire. They were survivors who had nothing left to lose except their will to fight. And that will had carried them across the galaxy to this moment, where the black horizon waited. Every display in the command room flickered with static. The closer they came, the more their systems faltered, as if the ship itself whispered warnings into the machines. One of the technicians muttered under their breath, trying to adjust controls that had worked perfectly minutes earlier. No signal could pierce the black ship's presence without being twisted. No scan revealed more than fragments of metal and shadows. It was as if the vessel refused to be seen, hiding its true form, even while towering in plain sight. Humanity's Scientists had debated if the ship was alive, if some intelligence older than the Tyrants pulsed inside it. None had dared to prove it, until now. Behind the tension of the mission, there was the memory of how it all began. The galaxy had not always belonged to tyrants. Long ago, many races thrived, each building their empires, their cultures, their worlds. Then the black ships appeared, silent, vast, unstoppable. They did not conquer with diplomacy or trade. They simply arrived, and those who resisted vanished. The tyrants who commanded them spread across the stars like a plague, enslaving worlds, breaking fleets, rewriting history to erase all who defied them. Humanity had been spared at first, considered too weak and scattered to matter. That mistake had given them time, and humans used time like a weapon sharper than steel. Generations grew up under the shadow of distant wars, watching worlds fall while Earth remained ignored. But silence breeds preparation. Underground bunkers became training grounds. Remote colonies became hidden foundries. Every whisper of rebellion in the galaxy eventually found its way into human hands, carried by fugitives and broken refugees who saw in humanity something they thought was gone: hope. That hope had not come from strength, but from refusal. Humans would not kneel, even when they stood alone. Now, in the shadow of the black ship, the crew remembered those voices, the old recordings of refugees describing entire planets, stripped, bare, their skies darkened by fleets that never left survivors. They remembered the warnings of engineers who studied fragments of enemy craft, saying no weapon ever made by humans could pierce the armor of the tyrants. They remembered the silent graves of those who had tried and failed. And yet, despite all of it, here they were, inching closer with ships built from scraps and courage. In the War Council before this mission, humanity's leaders had not spoken of certain victory. They had spoken of necessity. The tyrants were closing in on Earth itself, and soon there would be no more hiding, no more time. Either the black ship would be faced here, now, or Earth would vanish into the same silence that had swallowed 1,000 other worlds. This mission was not about survival anymore. It was about making a stand. Even if they all died, humanity would not die quietly. Every crew member carried that weight. In their silence, there was no fear left, only focus. They adjusted the small ship's course toward a breach in the black ship's outer defenses, a weak point discovered only through years of stolen data and desperate guesses. Whether it was real or only another trap, they would soon know. The engines hummed softly, almost like a heartbeat, each pulse drawing them deeper into the void. The black ship itself showed no movement, no signs of life. Yet its presence was suffocating, like standing at the edge of an abyss that stared back. Some of the crew whispered that it was not built by the tyrants at all, that they had only inherited it from something older, something far worse. Others believed the tyrants themselves had become part of the ship, their flesh and machines fused together across generations. No answer had ever been found. The only truth was that wherever the black ship sailed, nothing lived. And now, humanity was daring to set foot inside it. As the strike ships reached their approach vector, each crew member prepared for what came next. Weapons were armed, though they doubted they would matter. Tools for sabotage were checked, explosives primed. Every heartbeat was a reminder that once they entered the shadow, escape was unlikely. But the mission was never about escape. It was about fire. If they could wound the black ship, even once, they could prove to the galaxy that the tyrants were not untouchable. That small spark of proof could ignite rebellion in every corner of the stars. Somewhere far behind them, on Earth, families waited without knowing. Cities bustled with life as if the sky itself wasn't at risk of being consumed. Farmers still worked their fields, children still laughed, people still argued over trivial matters. They had no idea that their fate hung in the balance of a handful of ships creeping toward darkness. The crews knew this. They fought not just for themselves, but for those who lived in ignorance of how close the end truly was. That thought alone steeled their resolve. Then, without warning, the black ship stirred. A ripple ran across its surface, as if the void itself had shifted. Lights that had been dead for centuries flickered to life, cold, unnatural glows spreading, like veins across its hull. The strike ships froze, holding their silence, their engines dimmed to a whisper. For a breathless moment, it felt as if the black ship had awakened and turned its attention directly toward them. No alarm sounded, no weapons fired, but the silence grew heavier, pressing against them like a weight. Inside the strike ship, one of the crew whispered that they had been seen. Another whispered that being seen was not the danger, that being remembered was. The black ship, they said, did not just destroy its enemies. It erased them. Whole worlds had fallen not just into ruin but into absence, as if their names had been pulled from memory itself. If humanity failed here, it would not just be death waiting. It would be silence so complete that no one would remember they ever fought. Still, the ships crept forward. They had already crossed the point of no return. Behind them lay safety that was no safety at all, only the slow death of surrender. Ahead lay the horizon, dark and endless, promising either glory or nothingness. They chose forward, because that was what humanity had always done. They pressed into the shadow of the black ship, the lights of their vessels dimming as the void swallowed them whole. And then, for the first time, an opening appeared. A vast seam slid across the black hull, silent and precise, revealing a corridor of lightless metal. It was as if the ship itself had invited them inside. No alarms, no defenses, only an open mouth waiting to swallow them. The crews exchanged, tense looks, hearts pounding. Was it a trap, or had they truly found the weakness they had searched for so long? No one spoke the answer because no one knew. The strike ships slipped inside, vanishing into the belly of the black horizon. The corridor closed behind them, sealing out the stars. Darkness wrapped around them like a cloak, heavy and absolute. For the first time, humanity was not facing the black ship from the outside. They were inside it, trapped in the heart of their greatest enemy. And somewhere in that suffocating silence, something moved. The strike ships glided deeper into the black corridor, swallowed by a silence that felt alive. Their lights cut through the dark but seemed weaker with every passing second, as though the shadows themselves consumed energy. The walls were vast and seamless, stretching upward into emptiness, their surfaces too smooth, too perfect, as if shaped by something beyond human design. The crews said nothing, but their thoughts were heavy. They had studied every scrap of stolen data about the black ship, but none of it had ever described this. They were inside the heart of something that no living being had ever entered and returned from. Every breath felt stolen. The commander of the lead ship gave the order to maintain formation. Their voices were calm, almost cold, but beneath that, calm was the same fear gripping everyone else. No one wanted to admit it aloud, but each of them felt watched. There were no cameras, no scanners, nothing visible in the walls, and yet it was impossible to shake the sense of unseen eyes tracking every movement. The ship was not silent by accident. It was silent because it was listening. One of the technicians whispered that the air itself seemed different here. Though their ships were sealed, the sensors flickered with strange readings, traces of energy unlike anything human instruments had ever measured. Some thought it was radiation, others a kind of signal pulsing through the walls. None could explain why their instruments seemed to stutter, showing data that contradicted itself, as if the ship's interior bent reality in ways they couldn't grasp. Still, the commander pressed them forward. The mission demanded they find the core, the source of the ship's power, and strike it down. Whether they understood it or not didn't matter. Deeper inside, the corridor split into vast chambers. The strike ships drifted through spaces that could have swallowed entire fleets. Towers of black machinery rose like frozen giants, humming, faintly as if breathing in slow rhythms. Lights pulsed within them, soft and irregular, almost like heartbeats. The crews stared, silent and unsettled, realizing they weren't flying through empty space. They were flying through something alive, something that moved and thought in ways they couldn't yet see. The deeper they traveled, the more their ships began to falter. Engines sputtered, lights dimmed, systems froze without reason. Repairs were attempted, but nothing seemed broken. It was as if the black ship reached into their machines, unraveling them piece by piece, stripping away their defenses. One ship reported total loss of power, its crew floating helplessly in the shadows. Before anyone could respond, the ship drifted into one of the towering machines and vanished without sound. No explosion, no wreckage, just gone. The rest of the crews tightened their grips on controls, their voices cracking with the realization that survival was becoming more impossible with each second. Among the crews, fear manifested in whispers. Some believed the black ship was not a weapon at all, but a living being, a creature so vast it had been mistaken for a vessel. Others believed it was a prison, a cage built by an ancient race to contain something far worse, now hijacked by the Tyrants. And a few, silent but pale, thought the truth was even darker, that the Tyrants themselves had long ago been consumed, their wills absorbed into the ship until nothing remained of them but shadows that served its hunger. Whatever the truth, none of them could look at the endless black chambers without imagining that every wall pulsed with hidden life. At the same time, another conflict stirred beyond the ship itself. Back on Earth, debates raged in secret chambers. Some leaders argued the mission was madness, a waste of lives on a gamble that could never succeed. Others believed it was the only chance to show the galaxy that humanity was willing to strike the Tyrants where no one else had dared. Families of the strike crews prayed for their return, even as whispers spread that none would ever see them again. The people waited, caught between hope and despair, unaware that even their hope might draw the Tyrants' attention closer to Earth. In another corner of the galaxy, oppressed species watched nervously. Resistance groups in hidden colonies had heard rumors of humanity's mission. Some dared to dream that if the black ship fell, they could rise in rebellion. Others feared that if the mission failed, the Tyrants' vengeance would burn not only Earth, but every world that had ever sheltered. Humans. Humanity's gamble was not just theirs. It could decide the fate of every enslaved race in the galaxy. And so, whispers spread like fire in the dark, feeding both hope and dread. Inside the black ship, the crews pressed forward, splitting into teams. Some ships went searching for the power source, others for control nodes or structural weaknesses. Each step deeper drew them into stranger horrors. They found vast chambers lined with rows of figures, motionless in crystalline prisons. Some were alien, others unrecognizable, their bodies twisted into shapes that looked half organic, half machine. Were they victims of the Tyrants, or something older, trapped here for eternity? The humans didn't know, but they felt the eyes of those trapped forms, even though no eyelids moved. In one chamber, a crew discovered what looked like remnants of a fleet, ships torn apart and fused into the walls, their skeletons absorbed as if the black ship had swallowed them whole. Human voices cracked as they recognized designs of vessels long thought lost. Every wreck was a grave, and yet not even the dead had been left in peace. The black ship consumed everything, and in its hunger it left no trace of what once was. For the humans, it was proof that their mission mattered. If they failed, Earth too would vanish into these walls, forgotten. As the crews continued, tension grew between them. Some began to argue about whether they should press further or retreat, while they still could. Others snapped at one another under the strain, haunted by the silence of the ship that seemed to press into their thoughts. A few swore they heard whispers, voices not from their comms but inside their own minds, urging them to turn back, promising safety if they only surrendered. The black ship was not just attacking their machines. It was reaching into them, testing their wills. One crew member broke under the strain, shouting that they had to fire everything they had now before it was too late. Their commander held them back, reminding them that blind fire would mean nothing. Against walls they didn't understand. The crew member quieted, but the fear in their eyes remained, and others silently agreed with them. Every moment spent waiting felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall was coming but not knowing when. Deeper still, a faint glow appeared ahead, a light that cut through the shadows, unlike any they had seen. The crews leaned forward, hearts pounding. Was it the core? Was this the power they had come to destroy? Or was it something worse, waiting to ensnare them? The light pulsed in a rhythm almost like breathing, drawing them closer despite every warning in their instincts. The black walls around them seemed to throb with the same rhythm, as if the entire ship was alive and aware of their presence. Yet even as they approached the glow, new signals erupted on their scanners. Movement. Dozens, no, hundreds of shapes, detaching from the walls and ceiling. Small, swift, impossible to track. The humans had found something, but now the ship itself was awakening to stop them. Engines roared to life, weapons primed, every crew preparing for the inevitable clash. But the shapes did not attack, not yet. They swirled around the strike ships like predators circling prey, their outlines shifting and warping, too fast to focus on. It was a warning, a reminder that humanity had crossed into a place no one was meant to enter. The glow pulsed brighter, the whispers in the crew's minds louder, the sense of danger more suffocating than ever. They had come to fight the Tyrants, but now, deep within the dark horizon, they faced something far older, far stranger, and perhaps far more dangerous than any empire. And though the crews clung to their mission, each of them began to wonder, had humanity stepped into a war it could never truly understand? The strike ships floated inside the vast chamber, their lights trembling as though afraid to reveal what surrounded them. The glow ahead pulsed brighter, steady as a heartbeat, and every pulse seemed to echo inside the crew's chests. Around them, the circling shapes tightened their orbit, flickering between solid and formless, as if the black ship itself was reshaping shadows into hunters. The crews whispered into their comms, trying to track the movements, but their instruments gave nothing useful. The scanners flashed with static, the outlines scrambled, the data twisting into contradictions. It was as if the black ship wanted them to see nothing except fear. Inside one of the strike ships, the commander clenched their jaw, staring at the glow ahead. It felt like a trap, but it also felt like the answer. The one place that might hold the secret to the black ship's power. The mission had been clear. Find the heart, strike it, and prove that the Tyrants were not untouchable. Yet the deeper they went, the more it became clear this was no ordinary enemy. The black ship wasn't just a weapon of war. It was something far beyond human design, something that might not even be made by the Tyrants at all. And yet, what choice did they have but to push forward? Retreat was impossible now. The swirling shapes grew bolder, brushing against the strike ships' hulls with faint taps that sent shudders through the crews. Weapons were primed, fingers hovered over triggers, but no order to fire came. Firing blindly could drain what little power they had left, and if the shapes were illusions, it would mean nothing but wasted strength. So they waited, pressed by the tension of being prey surrounded by predators, too patient to strike. Each second dragged heavier than the last. The glow ahead began to shift. At first it seemed like a single point of light, but as the ships drew closer, they saw it was a vast structure, an orb suspended in nothingness, its surface covered with shifting lines of fire. The light pulsed through those lines, running across it like veins, until the whole thing throbbed like a living heart. The crews stared in silence, a mix of awe and dread tightening in their throats. If this was the core of the black ship, then it was alive, and they were intruders standing at the center of something that breathed. One crew whispered that they should detonate their charges here and now. Another hissed back that they didn't even know if the orb was the true source of power. What if it was only a distraction, a lure to draw them deeper? The argument spread in hushed tones until the commander cut them short. The mission was not to guess. It was to strike, and they would not waste the chance. Yet even as those words were spoken, no one moved closer. Something about the orb pulled at them, not like gravity, but like thought itself, pressing into their minds. The whispers returned, stronger now. They didn't come through the comms or from any single direction. They came from inside, crawling beneath the surface of thought. The voices were not human, but they spoke in words the crews could understand. They promised survival. They promised release. They promised that if humanity turned away now, Earth would be spared. Some of the crews clenched their fists, fighting against the pull. Others trembled, eyes darting, as though the promises pressed into wounds too deep to ignore. The black ship wasn't just watching them. It was probing them, seeking weaknesses, testing their resolve. One crew member broke, shouting that it was true, that the ship was offering mercy. They tried to override the controls, to turn their ship away. Their commander restrained them, but the damage was done. Fear spread like cracks in glass. And everyone wondered the same question. What if the whispers were real? What if they were about to sacrifice not only themselves, but Earth itself, when surrender could save it? The silence in the chamber grew thick with doubt. But even as the crews struggled with themselves, the shapes finally struck. They didn't attack with fire or weapons. Instead, they slammed against the hulls, wrapping around the strike ships like living shadows. Alarms blared as power drained faster than before, systems collapsing under invisible hands. Lights flickered, engines sputtered, weapons froze. The crews shouted, fighting controls that no longer obeyed. One ship vanished completely, swallowed, whole by the darkness without a sound. Another cracked open with a flash, its hull torn apart as though shredded by invisible claws. The screams of its crew cut through the comms before fading into static. Panic threatened to break them. The humans fired, bursts of light streaking into the shadows, but the shapes absorbed the blasts as if feeding on them. For every strike, the shadows grew thicker, heavier, pressing harder against the ships. The crews realized then that weapons meant nothing here. This was not a battle of firepower. It was a battle of will. The commander's voice cut through the chaos, steady and sharp. They reminded the crews why they were here, not for themselves, but for every world the Tyrants had crushed, for every life erased. They ordered the fleet forward, straight toward the glowing orb. Engines screamed as the strike ships forced themselves through the shadows, tearing free from the predators that clawed at them. Every meter forward was agony, systems failing, alarms wailing, crews fighting with bare hands against machines that betrayed them. But they moved inch by inch, closer to the heart. The orb pulsed brighter, reacting to their advance. The whispers grew louder, desperate now, no longer promises but threats. Surrender or be erased. Turn back or Earth burns. The voices clawed into their thoughts, each word a blade against their resolve. Some cried out, some wept, some fell silent, all together. But still the ships pressed on, because the alternative was worse. To turn back was to surrender to silence, and humanity had never surrendered. One ship was torn apart just meters from the orb, its pieces scattered across the chamber, swallowed into the black walls. Another ship lost all power, drifting helplessly, its crew watching in horror as shadows seeped inside through cracks that hadn't existed moments before. Their last words over comms were not screams, but defiance, voices raised in one final cry against the void. And still the others fought forward, battered but unbroken, their lights barely flickering but alive. The glow filled the chamber now, blinding in its intensity. The humans shielded their eyes, yet still pressed on, guided by instinct, by desperation, by the thought of Earth waiting far behind them. The orb beat like a massive heart, and with every pulse, the black ship shook as though aware of the humans closing in. The walls trembled, the shadows shrieked, and the entire chamber seemed to twist as if trying to throw them back. But humanity had always fought against the impossible, and this was no different. At last, the lead ship reached the edge of the orb. Its surface rippled like liquid, lines of fire racing across it in patterns too complex to follow. The crew stared, unable to tell if it was a machine, a living being, or both. They readied the charges, their hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of the moment. The whispers screamed now, filling their minds with chaos, every word a blade cutting at their sanity. Yet through it all, one truth burned brighter than any voice. Humanity had come too far to turn back. Engines roared, alarms blared, shadows screamed, and the orb pulsed brighter than a star. The crews braced themselves, knowing that the moment they touched it, everything would change. The black ship would either fall, or humanity would vanish into silence, and in that final breath before impact, the galaxy itself seemed to hold still, waiting to see if humankind's defiance would burn bright enough to pierce the darkest horizon. Strike ships trembled as they hovered at the edge of the glowing orb, their hulls cracking under the relentless pressure of the shadows. The crews were ready to deliver the final blow, their charges primed, their hands steady despite the weight of what was to come. But just as the first detonator was armed, the orb changed. The fire racing across its surface slowed, twisting into new patterns, symbols that none of them recognized. Then, impossibly, the light spoke. It wasn't sound. It wasn't even the whispers they had fought before. It was something deeper, older, that pressed directly into their thoughts. And the voice wasn't alien. It was human. The crews froze. For a heartbeat, none of them breathed. The voice carried no distortion, no strangeness. It sounded like one of their own. It begged them to stop. It pleaded that striking the orb would not end the black ship, but end everything. The crews stared at one another, shaken to their core. How could a human voice exist here, inside the very heart of the Tyrant's greatest weapon? Some thought it was a trick, another layer of the ship's manipulation, but others felt the raw desperation in the voice, too real to be fabricated. The commander of the lead ship demanded answers, speaking into the void, asking what the voice meant. The reply came at once, filling every mind at once. The black ship was not built by the Tyrants. It had been built long before them, by a civilization that feared extinction at the hands of something greater. The orb was not a power source, but a prison containing something vast and terrible that should never be released. And the humans, by coming this far, had awoken it. The crews argued in panic. Some shouted that it was another lie, that the voice was a trap designed to break their will. Others whispered that the voice was the truth, and that firing on the orb would doom not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. The commander tried to keep order, but the fractures in their unity spread fast. The black ship wasn't only testing their strength. It was dividing them, turning their mission into chaos. Outside the chamber, the swirling shadows intensified, slamming against the strike ships harder than before. Hulls buckled, alarms screamed, and every second of hesitation brought them closer to destruction. Yet no one could agree. One crew armed their charges, swearing they would strike no matter what. Another threatened to fire on them if they tried, insisting humanity had no right to unleash what was trapped inside. The chamber filled with shouts, static, and fear. The humans had come to strike a single blow, but now they were on the verge of destroying one another before they ever touched the core. The orb pulsed again, brighter now, as if sensing their indecision, and the human voice shifted. It was no longer a plea. It was a warning. It told them the Tyrants were not the true enemy. They were scavengers, parasites feeding on something older. The real war was never between humanity and the Tyrants. The real war was against whatever lay sealed inside the black ship, waiting to be freed. If humanity struck the core, they would not end the Tyrants. They would end the lock. The crews reeled. Generations of hatred against the Tyrants had carried them here. Every loss, every scar, every reason for vengeance. And now, with victory in reach, they were told their enemy was nothing but a shadow of something worse. It was unthinkable, unbearable, yet impossible to dismiss. Doubt consumed them, heavier than any weapon. What if they were about to make the greatest mistake in history? What if their final war was never truly theirs to fight? The commander made the call to hold, to wait for clarity. But before the order could spread, one of the strike ships broke formation. Its captain shouted through the comms that they would not hesitate any longer. They had lost too much to turn back now. They ignited their engines and charged the orb, charges armed and ready. The other ships screamed at them to stop, but the captain's voice was steady, unshaken. They said, humanity was built to fight, not to fear. And then their ship struck the orb. The explosion rocked the chamber, shaking the walls, blinding everyone in white fire. The strike ships were thrown off course, tumbling through the void as the orb's surface shattered. The shadows shrieked, retreating in waves, their forms unraveling like smoke torn by a storm. For a moment, it seemed the humans had won, that the core had been destroyed. But then the light changed. It didn't fade, it grew. The orb cracked open like an egg, lines of fire splitting wider, revealing a blinding void within. The human voice screamed now, not in words but in raw anguish, echoing inside every skull. The crews realized too late the truth of what they had been warned. They had not destroyed the black ship. They had broken its seal. Something stirred within the light. A shape, vast and incomprehensible, began to emerge, its presence pressing against every mind at once. The shadows fled from it, no longer predators but prey, scattering into the walls. The Tyrants had never controlled the black ship. They had only worshipped what slept inside, and now humanity had freed it. The strike ships scrambled, desperate to retreat, engines burning with every ounce of power they had left. But the chamber twisted around them, walls folding in ways that defied reality, corridors reshaping into cages. They were not leaving. The black ship, or whatever it had become, would not let them escape. And as the shape rose fully from the orb, they saw what it was. Not a machine, not a being. Something between both, older than empires, vast enough to fill the chamber with. Its presence alone. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, opened, and the humans felt the weight of being seen not as enemies, but as insects standing before a storm. The voice returned, but it was no longer human. It was layered, endless, filled with hunger and certainty. It told them that freedom had come, that silence would spread, that no world would remain untouched. The Tyrants had been fools to think they could control it. And humanity, in their defiance, had become the key to its release. The crews stared in horror, their mission twisted into something unrecognizable. They had come to destroy the Tyrant's weapon, to save Earth, to prove humanity's strength. Instead, they had unleashed a threat beyond imagining, something that might erase not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. Every sacrifice, every plan, every hope had led them here, to a mistake too large to undo. Yet even as despair pressed down on them, one truth cut through the chaos. Humanity had always been underestimated, always dismissed as too small to matter. Perhaps that was still true, or perhaps it was the one reason they could stand against what others could not. They had woken something no empire dared face. Now they had to decide if they would run from it or fight the war they never asked for. The chamber shook as the creature spread its form, the black ship cracking open around it like a shell. The strike ships were thrown back, battered but not, yet broken, their crews bracing against the storm. Outside, across the galaxy, the black ship's shadow spread wider than ever, eclipsing stars, shaking fleets, sending waves of fear into every world. The Tyrants themselves trembled, their rule shattered by the awakening of the thing they had once revered. And deep within the chaos, the humans prepared themselves for what came next. They had not come this far to kneel. They had unleashed a storm, but storms could be faced. The black horizon had shifted, darker and more dangerous than ever before. And humanity, for all their fear, stood at its center. The chamber shook with violent force as the creature fully emerged from the shattered orb, its vast form breaking through the black ship's walls as though the entire vessel had only been a shell built to hold it. The strike ships tumbled in the storm of energy, alarms blaring, hulls tearing as fragments of the ancient prison rained down around them. The humans had come to destroy a weapon, but instead, they had released something older and far more dangerous. Its presence pressed into their minds like an ocean-drowning thought, filling them with images of stars collapsing, worlds stripped bare, silence spreading until nothing remained but its hunger. The crews fought to hold their ships steady, but the black ship's systems twisted against them, corridors reshaping into endless traps. The shadowy forms that had attacked them before no longer circled. They fled, scattering into the void as if terrified of what had been released. That alone told the humans what they faced. Even the monsters that had haunted the galaxy feared this thing. Yet retreat was impossible. The chamber sealed itself, bending reality into walls no weapon could break. If they were to survive, they had to confront it directly. The commander of the lead ship gave the order no one wanted to hear. Every remaining charge, every last weapon, had to be directed at the creature itself. Their voices cracked as they spoke, but they spoke anyway, reminding the crews that humanity had never been defined by its size or its strength, but by its refusal to die quietly. If this was the end, then it would be an end the galaxy remembered. The humans armed their weapons, primed their engines, and prepared to strike. The creature turned its attention toward them. Its eyes, if they were eyes, opened wider, and the humans felt their thoughts unravel beneath its gaze. It spoke, not in words, but in waves of intent that shattered the silence. It mocked their defiance, reminding them of how small they were, how fleeting, how powerless against something that had devoured civilizations older than memory. It promised them a swift end, and through that promise came visions of Earth itself. Its skies darkened, its oceans boiling, its people screaming into nothing. The crews clutched their consoles, forcing themselves to look away from the visions, knowing they were nothing but weapons of fear. Then the first human ship made its move. Engines burning white, it shot straight toward the creature's form, detonating its charges in a blinding flash. The explosion tore through the chamber, shaking the walls, but when the light faded, the creature still stood unbroken, its surface rippling as if amused by the attempt. The crew that had sacrificed themselves were gone, erased without trace. The remaining humans felt despair crash over them, but only for a moment, because in that moment, they realized something. The explosion had not been useless. For a fraction of a second, the creature's form had flickered. It was not invincible. The commander's voice rang across the comms, fierce and unyielding. They ordered the others to focus every weapon, every charge, every ounce of defiance on the weak points revealed by the flicker. The humans responded with a fury born of desperation, their ships diving in coordinated strikes, weapons flashing, explosions ripping across the creature's form. Each strike made it waver, each explosion peeling back layers of its shadowed body to reveal something beneath, something mechanical, as if the ancient being was not purely alive, but fused with the very machine that had held it. The creature screamed, its voice filling the chamber with waves of soundless rage. It lashed out, tendrils of shadow tearing into the strike ships, ripping them apart with ease. One by one, ships fell, their crews silenced in fire and static, but each death opened another wound in the creature. Humanity was bleeding at peace, by peace, not through overwhelming force, but through sacrifice. And the more they struck, the more they realized that was the only way to win. The commander made the decision then that no one wanted to hear. The black ship could not be destroyed from outside. The prison had been shattered, but its remains could still be turned against what had escaped. If the humans could overload their ship's cores and direct them into the creature's wounds, they might ignite a chain reaction strong enough to collapse the entire chamber. It would mean no one survived, but it would seal the creature once more. Earth would be saved, but at the cost of every soul who had come this far. The crews listened in silence, and then, one by one, they agreed. They had always known this mission might be their last. Now they understood it truly was. They spoke final words across the comms, not of fear, but of memory, of families left behind, of laughter once heard, of the lives they carried within them. And then they armed their ships, engines burning toward the creature. The chamber erupted in fire as one ship after another tore into the creature's wounds, detonating in brilliant flashes that rocked its massive form. The black walls shuddered, collapsing inward, the prison reassembling itself through destruction. The creature screamed louder than before, a sound that shook not just the chamber, but the minds of every living being who felt it across the stars. It writhed, breaking apart, dragged back into the remains of the prison it had escaped. Humanity's sacrifice was binding it once more, piece by piece, at the cost of their own lives. At last, only the lead ship remained, its hull cracked, its engines failing. The commander stared at the chaos, the fire, the dying light of their comrades. They had one last charge, one last hope. With steady hands, they directed their crippled ship straight into the creature's heart. As the impact drew near, they spoke a single word across the comms, Earth, and then they were gone. The explosion was unlike any before. It tore through the chamber, collapsing the black ship inward. The creature shrieked one final time before, vanishing into the void sealed once more within the prison of its own making. The shadows that had haunted the humans dissolved, the walls crumbled, and then there was silence. The strike ships were gone. Every human who had entered the black horizon was lost. But far away, on Earth, the stars brightened. The shadow that had stretched across the galaxy began to fade, its weight lifted. Worlds long enslaved by fear felt the shift, and whispers of hope spread. The tyrants themselves trembled, their rule shaken by the knowledge that humanity, the race they had once dismissed, had struck a blow none before them dared. Yet as the galaxy breathed, the final twist remained unseen. In the silence of the ruins, amid the shattered fragments of the black ship, a faint pulse of light flickered. Not the creature's hunger, but something else. A recording. A memory. Within it was the human voice that had warned them before, trapped still within the prison, waiting. Perhaps it was a survivor of the civilization that had built the black ship. Or perhaps it was one of the humans who had perished, their essence captured by the strange technology. No one knew. But the pulse carried a message, faint and unyielding. This was not the end. The galaxy had been spared, but at a cost. And with it came a new question. If humanity could bind the darkness once, could they do it again when it rose? Or had their sacrifice only delayed what was inevitable? The story of the Black Horizon did not end with silence. It ended with a promise, carried in the stars, that humanity's fight was far from over. The silence that followed the collapse of the black ship stretched across the stars like a tide rolling back from a storm. For a long time, no one could believe it was over. The vast shadow that had hung over entire sectors was gone. The energy pulses that had rattled fleets and silenced worlds faded into nothing. What remained was emptiness, cold and vast, and the quiet knowledge that the humans who had entered the ship had not returned. Their ships were gone, their voices silenced, but their sacrifice had left its mark on the galaxy. On Earth, people looked up at the night sky without knowing the full weight of what had just happened. The lights above them seemed clearer, brighter, as if a veil had been lifted. Families still worked, children still played, but whispers began to spread. Refugees who had fled from worlds under the Tyrants' control felt the shift before anyone else. They knew the shadow had lifted. They felt the chains around their lives slacken. And soon word spread. Humanity had struck at the Black Horizon and won. Across the galaxy, enslaved worlds stirred. On colonies where rebellion had been crushed again and again, secret groups lit their beacons once more. Messages traveled through hidden channels, carrying the story that the black ship had fallen because of human defiance. Entire races that had given up hope found themselves whispering of freedom again. Some said humanity had done the impossible. Others said they had been mad to try, but no one denied the truth. The Tyrants were not invincible. For the Tyrants themselves, the loss was staggering. Their fleets had relied on the fear of the black ship, their rules cemented by its silent presence. With that weapon destroyed, their empire shook. Infighting erupted among their commanders, each scrambling to claim power now that the symbol of their dominance was gone. Their enemies sensed weakness, and small uprisings sparked like fire in dry grass. The balance of power across the stars had shifted, and humanity was at the center of it. On Earth, leaders received fragments of the final transmissions from the strike teams. Broken messages, distorted by static, carried their last words. Most were little more than noise, but a few words cut through clearly. Fight, remember, and Earth. Those words became more than messages. They became vows, repeated in quiet rooms and shouted in public squares. Humanity understood that their people had not died in vain. They had carved their defiance into the history of the galaxy, proving that even in the face of impossible darkness, they would not bow. There were questions that remained unanswered. Some asked what exactly had been sealed inside the black ship, and whether it was truly gone or merely bound again. Scholars and scientists debated the strange recordings left behind, the faint pulse of light that carried a human voice from within, the ruins. Was it one of the strike team preserved in some way by the ship's alien technology? Or was it the echo of the ancient builders who had once created the prison? No one knew. But the possibility that something still lived inside lingered, a reminder that the fight might not be finished forever. Yet for now, there was peace. Not perfect peace, not secure or certain, but the fragile peace of a galaxy that had seen the most feared weapon in history destroyed. Humanity emerged from the shadows, no longer overlooked, no longer dismissed as weak or insignificant. They had stood where others had fallen. They had faced what others had feared. And in doing so, they had forced the galaxy to see them not as prey, but as a force that could not be ignored. For the families of the strike teams, the grief was heavy. They would never see their loved ones again, never hear their voices or hold them close. But the grief was shared, not carried alone. Entire communities held vigils beneath the stars, speaking the names of those lost even when there was no trace of their bodies. Their sacrifice was carved into memory, not erased as the black ship had once erased so many. Humanity had made sure of that. Among the younger generations, stories spread quickly. Children heard tales of the humans who had sailed into the dark horizon and lit a fire no shadow could smother. They played games where they pretended to be strike crew, piloting makeshift ships made of scraps, daring one another to face the darkness. They did not understand the cost, but they understood the courage, and courage was enough to carry forward. In time, Earth would grow stronger. Alliances would form with races that had once avoided contact, each recognizing that humanity had proven its worth in the harshest way possible. Fleets would be rebuilt, defenses expanded, and plans made not just for survival, but for leadership in the galaxy's new order. Humanity had entered the war for survival, but they had emerged as something more, a beacon for those still living in fear. And yet, beneath the triumph, there lingered unease. The pulse of light recorded within the ruins of the black ship remained. Faint but steady, like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Some feared it meant the creature had not been destroyed, only bound again, waiting for another mistake to set it free. Others believed it was something else, a message left for humanity alone, a sign that their role in the galaxy's story was far from finished. Whatever the truth, it meant the shadow of the horizon had not entirely vanished. But if it returned, humanity would be ready. That was the final lesson of the strike team's sacrifice. The Tyrants had underestimated them, the galaxy had dismissed them, and even the ancient prison had tried to break them. Yet they had stood their ground. They had fought with nothing but scraps, courage, and the will to protect the world they loved. And in doing so, they had proved that humanity's greatest weapon was not ships or guns, but defiance. The stars stretched endless and vast, their light brighter now than it had been in living memory. Humanity looked upward, not with fear, but with determination. The final war against the Tyrants had been waged, and though the cost was heavy, the victory was real. The galaxy would remember the Black Horizon, not as the end of hope, but as the moment when humanity lit a flame in the darkness and refused to let it die. In the silence left behind, the legacy of the strike teams lived on. Their voices echoed. In every new alliance, in every act of rebellion, in every child who dared to dream of a future without fear. They had given their lives to ensure that the Black Horizon would not consume the stars, and in doing so, they had carved humanity's place among them. The war was over. The Tyrants were broken. The darkness had been sealed once more. And though questions remained, though the future was uncertain, one truth burned brighter than all the rest. Humanity had faced the darkest horizon and emerged unbroken. The galaxy would never forget.